Welcome to this workshop on demystifying university and scholarship applications. This is a workshop that we have curated exclusively for mentees on the Pakistan Graduate Mentorship Programme. And speaking of which, in case you haven't submitted your declaration yet, please ensure that you do so immediately. Once I get through these initial few slides, I will drop a link to the declaration in the chat as well. So if you haven't submitted your declaration yet, ensure that you click on that link and submit that form now itself, so that there are no further delays in assigning mentors to you and also letting you know what form of mentorship we are able to offer this year, whether it's one-on-one mentorship or cohort mentorship. But more importantly, coming back to this workshop itself, this is what the outline for today is going to look like. I'm going to very briefly tell you what you can expect to hear at today's workshop. And then I'm going to introduce you to your wonderful set of panelists who incidentally are also mentors on the Pakistan Graduate Mentorship Programme for this year and may be working with some of you through this application cycle. And our panelists are going to then take you through important yet fundamental questions like why you should consider an education abroad. And if you do, what are the basics you should be getting right? How to find a course you are interested in? What are the general eligibility requirements you will need to bear in mind? And then they will also give you a sense of all the things you need to remember with respect to the application process. It's especially all the documents that you may be expected to submit when you're applying to a university abroad, such as a personal statement, writing samples, letters of recommendation, scores for various standardized tests, etc. Some of our mentors and panelists will also take you through, the burning question of funding and scholarships. And we are also lucky to be joined by some mentors who are currently pursuing their PhDs. So they will also give you some guidance on research degrees, particularly what additional things you need to be thinking about when you make PhD applications. And once we get through all of this, we'll move to the Q&A part of today's workshop, where you can freely ask whatever questions you have in mind. About the workshop itself, as you were informed in your mentee orientation, we have curated this 10-part workshop series, which we are going to run over the coming 4 weekends. As you know, 2 of your workshops are already happening over this weekend. So for 4 more weekends, we are going to run these workshops. And these are going to cover basically the fundamentals that you need to be aware of when it comes to making applications to universities abroad. So you will receive guidance on, standardized tests, CV writing, how do you draft a research proposal for a PhD, SoP drafting, etc. Please remember that these workshops are meant to supplement your mentorship, and they are, in fact, a very crucial and essential part of your mentorship here at OPP and Project EduAccess. So please don't tell yourselves that the workshops are not important. Your mentor will anyway guide you. No, the workshops are also equally important. Sometimes you may find yourself in a situation where your mentor is unable to answer a very specific question that you may have about, a very specific university's application process, but you may find that there's somebody at one of these workshops who has the answer for your questions. So please have that open perspective towards these workshops and ensure that you join all of them. Today's workshop, as you know, has been titled Demystifying University and Scholarship Applications. So the idea is just to take you through various elements that tend to be common to most university and scholarship applications across the world, and definitely in the UK. And like I said earlier, today we are lucky to be joined by 5 wonderful panelists who are also mentors with us. And you can see their details on your screen at the moment. So we have Nimra, Ali, Wajiha, Hassan, and Musa. And the good thing is that they have experience with both taught degrees as well as research degrees. And you have folks who have done their masters, and you also have folks who are currently doing their PhDs. So Please, depending on what kind of course you are planning to apply to, feel free to ask whatever questions you want once we navigate to the Q&A part of today's workshop. Okay, I think now is a good time for me to stop my ramble and hand over to Nimra to begin the substantive part of this workshop.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to cover the basics of the university application process, including the scholarships, and why might you want to consider, a degree abroad. So why study abroad? So each and every person, each and every individual, you might be, motivated by different reasons of why do you want to pursue an education, maybe in the UK, US, Canada, or wherever in the world that you are aiming for. So generally, there might be, these are some of the motivation or factors that we've highlighted over here that might encourage you or motivate you to apply to degrees abroad. So number one, in no particular order, number one could be, the university reputation or the rankings, the global rankings in the maybe in the specific course that you're interested in. Two could be, how generous they are with their funding options or their scholarships that they have on board. Three, it could be the career prospects they offer you. Some universities, they have a designated career services department at the designated career counselors who guide you through, the process of the tedious process of job applications. And they offer quite a helpful amount of resources on job applications as well. It could be, the diversity or the inclusivity of the university and the inclusivity of the cohort itself that the university offers you. So, and a number of maybe, student societies that offer you leadership opportunities or maybe, spearheading a cause or whatever you want to do, maybe, at a university level. Fifth could be student welfare. So the amount of, tangible or intangible sort of help for your physical and mental well-being. And then, prestigious universities like Oxford, Cambridge, they have, and even Harvard in the US, they have like access, they give you access to libraries and museums and tons of resources, that are useful for research in the future. So at an individual level, you might be motivated by a whole, another factor or a reason. Maybe it might be a stepping stone for a career or a dream job that you wanted, or maybe, so for example, during the COVID years, there were many students, because the job market was in a crunch. There were many people who entered, they started pursuing a graduate degree. So again, there are multiple reasons for it. So back to basics. So there could be, confusing terminologies that are used in the US or the UK, and there might be a difference from your host country and, the country that you're applying to. So undergraduate is basically the same, it's equivalent to a bachelor's degree that you might, have in your home country as well. A graduate or a postgraduate degree is essentially it can be interchangeably used. In the US they prefer the graduate, in the UK they prefer using the postgraduate degree. So it's essentially your master's degree or your PhD degree. So then we're going on to heading off to the types of applications that we have. So basically you have your university application that you apply to, and then so there are three different ways, like this is how I'd like to bracket the scholarship applications. So there are essentially three broad categories of scholarship applications. One is that, when you're submitting your university application, you might be automatically considered. Once you check that box that you require funding or you require, or you're looking for scholarships, they might be automatic. You might be automatically considered for a number of scholarships within that university or within that college, that department. So that's one kind of degree, that's one kind of scholarship, and it requires no other, additional maybe written essays from your side or no additional documents from your side. You're automatically considered for it. You don't have to do anything for it. The second, category of scholarship is that where you might have to submit some, additional documents or maybe additional written statements or maybe, additional essays. This is in addition to your SOP and your university essays that are required as part of your application. And the third is like, for example, the chevening or the couple of Erasmus Mundus, or in the US, you have a lot of other scholarship options as well, where you're required to submit a completely independent application, independent of your university application. You're required to submit a different scholarship application. So essentially what I'm trying to say over here is that your university application and your scholarship application, they might be the same or they might be the different, so depending on the type of scholarship that you're applying to, it's very important to consider what the scholarship really requires from you. Is it a college scholarship? Is it a department scholarship, which you don't have to do anything about it? Or is it an external scholarship? So you might have to look at what the funder is really looking for. So maybe in that case, they're looking for some certain specific leadership skills, or they're looking for, if it's a country specific scholarship, they might be looking for, how are you going to go back home and serve your country. So again, it's very, very important to look at the specific requirements of each and every scholarship, and then maybe consider, would you have to submit a separate application for the scholarship, or would you be automatically considered for the scholarship within the university application portal. Then we come to university rankings. So there are a couple of university rankings. This is the QS World University Rankings, the Higher Education Times Higher Education Ranking. So here I just want to clarify one point, that these rankings might be misleading in the sense that you might be interested in a very, because these are generic rankings. So you might be interested in a completely different course. And so, for example, for economics, maybe MIT might be a good choice, or maybe LSE might be a good choice. But maybe for social sciences, if you're looking in the UK, maybe SOAS might also be, a good contender. So it really is important to look at course-specific rankings when you're looking at, university rankings. Then your best friend and your is websites, So you really have to look at the university or scholarship websites when you're for the most accurate source of information on the requirements and the eligibility and the criteria and what the course really entails and what is it about. There might be floating information that you find on social media, or maybe a friend of you, or maybe a colleague tells you something about it. But it's really important to verify that information and go to the website and check at the requirements, the deadlines, everything else. It's always there on the website. So your best friend is the website. Then comes, it's important, you can always seek advice. So it's best to seek advice from current students, maybe, or alumni or the graduates who've graduated, or professors over there. Reach out to them, ask relevant questions. You might have a lot of questions regarding not just the university, but maybe what the city is like, what the food's like, and modes of transportation, and what the housing facilities are like. So there are a couple of whole variety of questions that you might have. So it's really important that you reach out to people, maybe on LinkedIn, and ask questions and maybe this is an excellent portal as well, Project EduAccess. Reach out to the mentors through the workshops, through one-on-one sessions or the cohort sessions, and ask whatever questions you have. Next slide, please. So how to find a course that you're interested in? So there are different sets of people. So sometimes people are very focused and they know what they're what the program they're looking for or what they're really interested in. And sometimes people are very confused, like we don't know what university we should apply to or what course we should apply to. So these are like generic steps that you might want to consider when applying to a university and finding the relevant course. So step one again is you identify maybe 3 or 4 universities that you want to apply to. This list could be larger, and it depends on the amount of time and the resources that you have, because each university application takes a lot of time, plus financial resources. So it depends on how many as universities you want to apply. Ideally, you shortlist like 10 universities, 3 maybe your dream universities, then 4 of them maybe mid-tier, and 3 could be the backup options. If you're not getting acceptances from anywhere, maybe you get your short get those acceptances. So roughly that's the figure that you look for. Step 2 is that you check out there. So for example, we've attached snapshots over here of different universities websites. So sometimes it's the admissions tab or it's the study tab where you find the relevant graduate or the postgraduate courses. So you open up those, and then you see, you find list of courses over there under the graduate study or the postgraduate study. You find a list of courses, and then you see what best matches your interest or your profile. So if you have a degree in physics and maybe, you're looking for a higher degree relevant to that. And maybe sometimes it's completely, so depending on the requirements of the courses, sometimes, so for example, if you're coming from with a background of maths, let's say, so you have multiple options to explore. Maybe you could go to the computer sciences side, or maybe you could go to the engineering side. So there are a lot of, options that you have depending on what your base degree, what your bachelor's or what your undergraduate really is in. So you can, choose the course accordingly. Step 4 is, again, you have to see the eligibility requirements. So sometimes the requirements are quite stringent in the sense that they require you to have certain specific grades or certain specific CGPAs or certain specific degrees or courses that you might have taken. So for example, for an economics PhD, sometimes some universities require you to take those real maths courses, which is real analysis and topography and everything else. Sometimes, some universities are very lenient in that sense. So again, the eligibility requirements are that they're your guidelines to which, course that you can apply to. And then step 5 is, again, once you've, highlighted maybe there are 3 courses or 5 courses or 7 courses that you want to apply to. You look at their funding options. Maybe there might be internal funding options within the university or within that department, or maybe there could be external organizations that are offering you scholarships or funding opportunities. So you keep an eye on those. Next slide, please. So for example, when you're looking for previous slide, yeah. So for example, if with Oxford, it might be, the application might get a bit confusing because they're colleges, then there are departments, then there are divisions, and, the university itself. So basically, when you're applying for the course, the Oxford has 4 divisions roughly. This is the social sciences, the humanities, the physical sciences. So, and then there are departments under each division. And once you select the department, you can, go and find a list of courses under each department, or there might be courses that are cross-listed across 2 maybe departments or across 3 departments or multiple departments. And then there are colleges, and colleges are mostly, related to your housing or your extracurriculars. And hopefully, all of this stuff would be covered in detail in, the next series of workshop as well. So this is just a brief overview that I'm giving you. Next slide, please. So for example, when you land on Cambridge University's website portal and you look, this is a specific course that you've, maybe selected. So MPhil in Development Studies. So there are multiple tabs over here, which gives you the overview, basically tells you what your expectations should be from this course, what the career opportunities are, and what is basically, roughly what's taught in this course. Study, again, it highlights in detail, the structure of the course, maybe the courses that you're going to study in the next 2 years, or maybe if the program over here, if you look at on the right side, it really highlights that this is a 9 months program. So another important point that I want to highlight is that in the UK, certain specific, MSc or MPhil or MA courses, they vary in their duration, in the sense that some might be 9 months long, some might be 2 years. So depending on again, the time, the resources, and it depends on your motivation. So you can choose whatever, course best fits your profile and what you want to do. So over here, if we click on the requirements tab, then or how to apply tab, there we get the number one important thing that you have to keep in mind is the deadline. So most of the deadlines for the Oxford University or the Cambridge are in December, but there are certain specific courses that have deadlines in January too. And then there are other universities that have deadlines up till April, March and April. So again, depending on your timelines, and you have to check. So the number one, restriction is the deadline. So if you're applying right now, you have ample time. But if you open up, maybe applications in December, you might want to consider universities that are more flexible with their deadlines. Coming on to, next slide, please. Okay, like I highlighted before, some degrees in some courses, they're cross-listed across multiple departments. So for example, and sometimes, for example, in the US, you'll find degrees that are more, cross-listed. So maybe the economics and the computer science department, they've together offered a degree in data analysis for public policy or, degrees of this sort. In the UK as well, there are these sort of courses. So for example, Oxford offers social data science that's cross-listed between the Oxford Internet Institute, I believe, and from the humanities side, there's another department that co-hosts the course. So depending on your interests and what you want to do, you might want to consider, courses such as, maybe South Asian studies that cover, they're more generic in nature and they cover, they have a little bit of everything. So yeah, next slide, please. And then, so these are certain general eligibility requirements. So in terms of the academic requirements, Oxford and Cambridge, they have like a terminology, they use certain terminologies like upper second class honors degree or a lower second class, lower first class honors. So what you can always do is it's always helpful that on their website, I'm not sure if it's linked here, but maybe we could add up a video tutorial at the end. Then on their websites, usually if you select the country you're coming from, and then if you select the university where you've done your bachelor's from, then you can look at a certain specific entry requirements, such as there's a cutoff GPA. So for example, if you've studied in Pakistan, maybe in Lahore, from a certain specific university, let's say LUMS, then there's a cutoff GPA for most of the courses, which is 3.9 or 3.7. So depending on where you've done your bachelor's from, you can always check the cutoff GPA. Again, I would say that these are not, they're harsh in that sense, but they're not so harsh. You can always, give it a shot. Even if you don't meet the GPA requirement, you can have a stellar profile. Maybe your standardized test scores are amazing. So there's something else in your profile that compensates for your GPA or for your, undergraduate degree. Or maybe you highlight something, in your application, which might be covered later in the SOP part as well. So the tricks and ways on how to, basically cover up or maybe even, compensate for a lower mark or lower grades in your undergraduate degree. Then we're moving on to the financial requirements. So proof of finance is basically you need to supply your bank statements in case if you're self-financing the course, or if it's a scholarship, then you just, you just tell them that you're unable to afford education, and they offer you a scholarship letter, and then you just attach it with your application and later, in the process. And that's sufficient for the financial proof. Competence in English, basically, almost all the universities require these standardized English language tests, which is either the TOEFL or the IELTS. But in some cases, you can apply for English language waivers as well. And in some certain universities, so for example, if the mode of education at your bachelor's degree was English, mode of instruction was English language, then you can obtain letters from your universities and then, attach it in your application. That again, you have to check, on the course websites and see if they accept such letters from your bachelor's universities or your undergraduate programs, and they waive off, the TOEFL or the IELTS requirements. Sometimes, so for example, TOEFL, I know it's valid for 2 years. Sometimes, the application process is quite tedious, and you might be applying a year and you don't get acceptances, another, and you don't find one, and the third year you do. So your TOEFL scores, let's say, expire. In that cases as well, you can always email the admissions committee, and in certain specific cases, they might make an exception for you or an exemption for you. But it's best to make sure, because deadlines might be very tight and the dates might be very tight for these standardized tests. So it's best to take all of these standardized tests way before your, the application process, so you're done and dusted with these. Again, the standardized test scores, so there's GRE, GMAT, and if you're applying for a law program, there might be other sets of, standardized tests. Again, some universities, especially after COVID, they've offered, exemptions for the GRE and GMAT, and some universities also offer waivers. But it's best that if you've taken the GRE, it's best to just attach the unofficial score reports. If you've not taken the GRE, you can always request the admissions committee to waive off this requirement. If they don't, then, it's best to take this at least, 3 months prior to your application process. So for example, if the deadline's in December, it's best that you all should have been, taken the GRE right now, because sometimes you might want to retake the exam. Also, I want to add that sometimes universities also cover the GRE fee. So it's really important to look at the funding page and see if they offer, scholarships for you, and if they cover the GRE fee as well, or if they offer the waivers as well. So all of these things are available on the website. Again, course websites, they're your best friend. Browse them, dig deeper into them, and look at all the requirements, and you're good to go. Next slide, please. So key information, this is something which I believe was highlighted in the Cambridge slide as well. It's something that's there usually on the right side of the webpage, and it highlights the duration of the program. So either it's 2 years or 9 months for a typical MSc or an MPhil program. For PhDs, it varies from 3 years, or you can go up to 4 and even 5 years. But fundings are usually available just for 3 years, and then you can add on to a year. And this is something that might be, covered in later series of the workshops as well. So I don't want to delve deeper into this. Then programs, they might be starting in October or the April session. So this is the summer session or the winter session. You have to check which programs are starting when and which suit your, you and your application timelines the best. Attendance mode, so for example, at the time of COVID, I particularly did my degree in 2020, and that was the peak of COVID. So my degree offered me a flexibility it was a hybrid program, although it's an in-person program right now, but it was a hybrid program at that time that we could take classes in person or take online classes as well. So you need to check this from the website, whether it's an online, whether it offers there's a remote option, or whether it offers, you have to be there in person and attend the classes full time. There are always options to take part-time or full-time course. So part-time obviously doubles the time. So for example, if it's a 9-month course, 9 months course full-time, then it would be, a 2 years course part-time. It's more suitable to people, who are working maybe, or who are financially constrained, or whatever reasons you might have. You can explore a variety of options when it comes to mode of attendance. Fees, so depending on, I believe all of the people here in the workshop are from, the global south. So depending on if you're living within the UK, the fee structure is slightly different. And if you're an international student, the fee structure is slightly different. So it's really important to look at the fee structure, look at the housing and the housing expenses, and budget everything if you're not on a scholarship and if you're looking at self-financing options. And then entry requirements, these are more generic academic requirements that I've discussed before as well. It might be a certain specific GPA that they require from you, or there might be a certain specific course that they might want you to study at the undergraduate level or the bachelor's level, or they might want you to have a degree in a certain specific field. So for example, if it's a data analysis, data analytics course that you're trying to pursue at the postgraduate or the graduate level, they might want you to have a background from sciences or the economics side, or every course has a different set of academic entry requirements. So you need to keep an eye on that. I believe this is it from my side. So if you have any questions, I'll be there in the Q&A session. Happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nimra. Ali, you have the floor.
Hi. So I'll take you through the documents that you need to make a graduate application. The first one is the statement of purpose. Basically, it helps you to describe your reasons for applying to a particular program. It can demonstrate your research interest, your academic qualifications, your career plans, or other aspects of your life or your past experiences that might be relevant to the program that you're applying to. Again, this statement of purpose, you need actually, as Nimra pointed out, you need to check the documents that you need to make a graduate application. Some programs ask you to submit a statement of purpose, some don't. The second one is CV. It's basically just a summary of your academic qualifications, your experiences, work experiences, teaching experience if you have any. For example, if you're applying for a research degree, your skills, if you have any publications, it's that. The third one is writing samples or essays. So basically, you need writing samples, especially if you're applying for an academic degree. For example, like for instance, if you're applying for an MPhil or a PhD, you need writing samples. Basically, they are just piece of documents which in a way demonstrate your academic writing skills. It can be your essays. For example, if you're applying for a master's program, it can be your essays that you wrote as part of your BA, or it can be your dissertation. And if you already have a master's and you are applying for a PhD program, it can be your dissertation that you wrote as part of your master's. It can also, in some cases, it can also include, for example, essays. If you don't have writing samples, you can write writing samples as part of preparing your application material. Then there are scholarship essays. Again, they can be part of your applications, or you need to make, in some cases, their scholarship applications are separate from university applications. They can be just essays like the statement of purpose, or they can be separate essays. For example, it really depends on the scholarship that you are applying for. So it can be for example, scholarship you are applying for, they ask you questions and you need to answer those questions. The fourth is academic qualification documents. So it includes your transcriptions or transcripts, which, for example, if you're applying for PhD, you need to submit your master's and your BA transcript. And if you're applying for a master's, you need to submit your BA transcript. It can also include certificate or diplomas which you did as part of your, for example, if you're applying for history and you are doing early modern history of South Asia, so you might want to, or you have done a certificate in Persian language, so you can upload that as part of your application. And as Nimra pointed out earlier, you also need to submit evidence for competence in English, which can be your TOEFL scores, IELTS score. And fifth one is your reference letters or letters of recommendations. I think there's a whole section in this workshop later on that. One document that's not part of here, and there's a good reason for that, is research proposals. They are usually not part of the applications unless you're applying for research courses specifically. For example, if you're applying for PhD, there is a research proposal that you need to submit. And if you're applying for academic research masters, then you need to submit a research proposal. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so what is a CV? Basically, CV is just a document that contains information about your academic qualifications, your work experience. There's a difference between CV and a resume. A resume tend to be one-page summary of your academic qualifications and your work experience. It's very brief, very to the point, whereas CV is more detailed, more comprehensive document that captures your academic qualifications, your work experience, if you have any experience of doing volunteer work, your language skills, other kind of skills. One thing I'd like to point out here is that, for example, universities in UK, they usually don't explain this, but they just, for example, if you go to Cambridge University's postgraduate admissions website page for any course, they have just mentioned resume / CV. So basically it comes down to your personal preference, but I usually prefer CVs because they are more comprehensive, they are more detailed. And again, CVs can vary. For example, again, if you are applying for a scholarship separately from your academic application, then you might want to look into things that funding organization is looking for, and you need to highlight those things in your CV. Next slide, please. So there are common heads in every CV. The first one is personal information. It has your name, your contact information. It cannot. I mean, it again depends on your preference, but it can or cannot have your address to reach out to. The second one is education, which is your academic qualifications. The third one is your work and research experience, and it can have, it can be one heading, and it can also have subheadings. For example, you might, if you have taught before, let's say, so you might want to add, your teaching experience separately from your research experience. Or if you have done an admin work, you might, want to mention that separately. The fourth one is your publications, if you have any publications. The fifth one is your conferences, project, courses that you want to highlight as part of your application. For example, if you are applying for a certain course and they are looking for, let's say, if you're applying for an economics course and they want you to have, already have read certain courses or studied for certain courses, you might want to highlight that here. Sixth one is your award, honors, and scholarships that you have received previously. This one is really important when it comes to applying to universities, and especially when it comes to scholarship and funding. Seventh one is skills. This is again for example, if you're applying for a digital humanities course and you have Python, this is the place to mention it. The eighth one is extracurricular activities. It can also include your volunteer work experience regarding that. The next one is languages. So if you're applying for, let's say, classics degree, and you need to mention it here that you know Latin or Greek, stuff like that. If you're applying for let's say anthropology in Pakistan or in South Asia, you might want to point out here that you know languages of the communities you plan to work on. The 10th one is references. So this is just the format. You may or may want to include references as part of your CVs. It really depends on you. For example, if you are making an academic application and for any graduate course, you have to provide references. So even if you skip that in your CV, so it's fine. And most important point is that it varies. For example, here's second is education and third is work and research experience. But for let's say you are working for many years now, and now you are returning to the university, so you might want to highlight your research experience before your education, so you can do that. That's fine. Next slide, please. So the general tips on the CV. And this is what I also do. I have this master's CV that has everything that I have done. I have done everything that there is to mention about me, and then I tailor that CV for specific applications. For example, you are applying for history, there are different skill sets that you might want to highlight, and then you are applying for some area studies course. So there might be different set of skills that you want to highlight, so you can do that. Scholarship applications, again, for that, let's say, for instance, you are applying for GATES and they are looking for somebody who has leadership potential and who is commitment to improving the life of others. So you need to highlight that in your CV. So you have to, if you are applying for a particular scholarship as a part of your academic application, you might want to balance your academic side and your volunteer experience, other experiences side in your CV. Next slide, please. So I think that's it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. Vajiha, I think, going next.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll talk to you about the SOP, or the personal statement, which is quite the notorious part of the application, I think. But to me, I think it's the best part, because this is the part where you get to show who you are, and you get to tell people about yourself beyond the things that you've already mentioned, like, grades and job history, all of that. You really get to show yourself. Before we delve into this, one caveat that I would definitely add at this point is that don't try to use the same personal statement or SOP for multiple applications, because they always will have different requirements. So beyond the very obvious word limit requirements, they also have very different questions. So for instance, if you're applying to Oxford, let's say, their prompt for the research statement or the SOP is going to be different from even, let's say, Cambridge. Then if you're applying to a school in the US, that they're going to have a very different requirement for what they want you to mention in your statement. For instance, if you are applying for Fulbright, let's say, they have two different statements, right? So one is personal statement, one is academic statement. On the other hand, when you apply to, let's say, when you're applying for a department in Oxford, and this again varies by department, but they ask you to submit one statement. And so you have to be very careful in what you write according to the prompt, because it also varies with the amount of personal information that they want. So some programs are very focused on just the academic side of things, and they want you to tell about your academic journey, why you want to pursue this particular degree, etc. Whilst other programs want to know more about you and your background. And this is particularly true for scholarships, by the way. So a lot of the scholarships want to know more about you, your personal background, your future aspirations, those kind of things. So the point is that just make sure that you read the prompt very clearly, and then you tailor your points and your statement to the prompt. Next slide, please. Right. So you have to remember that your SOP is, again, more than your grades, more than your scores, more than anything that you've already mentioned. So when you're writing your SOP, when you're thinking about what to write, when you're jotting down your points, just keep reminding yourself that they already have a certain amount of information about you. So they already know your grades, they have your CV, they know what course you want to study, they know all these things. So whenever you write, just make sure that it's not a repetition of the information that you've already given them. It's not a list of your achievements. It's not a list of your scholarships or anything of that sort, because you've already given them that in your application. So you have to move beyond that. The way I like to think of it is that you have given them all these data points, right? So you've told them your grades, you've told them your degrees, etc. And now is the time where you get to sort of weave a story out of these data points. So using these data points, you have to create a narrative. Each one of you has a story to tell. So this is where you basically tell that story. So you use all the information that you have and create a story. So for instance, you've told them that you have that you did a certain degree back home, a certain field for your master's or your thesis project. So this is where you can tell them more about why you picked that, what interested you most about that, those kind of things. But be very careful that it's not a list of your achievements. It's not a place where you can show off all that you've achieved, because you've already done that in your CV and etc. So you have to move beyond that, and you have to have a story that you want to tell them. Next slide, please. Right. So again, because SOP varies a lot depending on where you're applying and what the focus of the SOP is, but I think this is a fairly basic structure that you can follow. The idea is that a lot of times what people do is that because they know what they want to say, right? So for instance, if you were talking about your passion, you already know everything. So they assume that readers know it as well. And so it's often very haphazard. So that's why it's very important to have a structure. I would recommend first just jotting down everything that comes to your mind, whether you make points, whether you start writing, just write down everything that you want to say and then structure it. It must have a very clear structure, because again, the admission committee, the scholarship committee, whoever is reading it, they don't know who you are. They know nothing about you. So keep that in mind and give it a very nice order, so that when a new person for the first time is reading that, everything is clear to them. It's not all over the place. And you can keep it, I'd recommend, like for introduction and conclusion, obviously, they have the most impact, so make them very strong. But for the middle and for the flow of it, you could possibly make it chronological, not necessarily, but again, it's easier because it helps keep things more clearer for the readers. And you can use a very simple language, so don't worry about that, oh, my writing skills are great or aren't great or something like that. You can use very simple language. It actually should be easy to read. You don't need to use very decorative or fancy language or anything. But having said that, what you need to make sure is that there are no typos, no grammatical errors, because like I said, this is like the admission committee or the scholarship committee. They don't know you. This is the only piece of writing from you that they might be reading. This is the first time that they're getting to know you. So if you have, any silly mistakes, any typos, any grammatical errors, it doesn't look very nice. So while you don't need to use any fancy language, you can keep your style simple, but make sure that it's error-free. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think this is a helpful checklist that we've put together where you can just see the different things that you can and should talk about, and you can cover all of these. But again, be careful that you don't end up sort of making a list of all that you've done. You can use all these and then link them to the story that you are trying to tell them. And it's a very good opportunity to share things that you can't include in anywhere else. So for instance, there's a research project or a volunteer project that you did that doesn't really fit in your CV or anywhere else in the application. So this is the space where you can tell them about that, tell them about something, whatever it is about it that you're really passionate about. So this is a space where you can do that. And again, just stressing in the point that whatever you've already told them throughout the application, this is the space where you bring it together and you make a story and tell them why you're the best candidate. Because a lot of times, the more competitive the places that you're applying to, the harder it is, because everybody will have similar statistics, right? So if you tell them your GPA, there might be a lot of other people with the same high GPA. If you're telling them about some wonderful professional experience that you have, there is a chance that a lot of people might have equally good experience. So this is the space where you can really show why you stand out among everyone. Next slide, please. yeah, again, so you can go through all these questions when you're thinking of writing and when you start jotting down your points. It's a very helpful checklist. But one thing from this slide that I would point out is the second bit, which is why are you interested in this university and graduate program? So this is very important. Over here, I've seen a few times where applicants just start, for instance, if I'm pursuing a MSc in social policy. So what I will do is I'll just go to the department website and I'll sort of paraphrase what they've said that this degree does. I would strongly recommend not doing that because the department committee or the scholarship committee, whoever you're writing for, they already know what they're offering, right? So the department knows what their degree is. You don't have to tell them that. Instead, what you need to do is you need to research more thoroughly and you need to see what you can look into different things. So, for instance, you can go to the department website, you can look into the kind of research that they're doing. And then you can be very specific in your personal statement. For instance, you can say, oh, I have seen that your department is working on this particular thing, and I'm really interested in this thing, which is why I want to do this program. You can write names of specific professors. So, for instance, there's one professor in the department whose research you really like, so you can specifically mention that. And they like that because it shows that you have done your research, right? And it shows that you're not just giving them a very surface level reason of like, oh, this program teaches you how to evaluate policy, which is why I want to do that. That's not good enough. So the more specific you are, the better, because it again shows them that you have done your research. So yeah, this is one thing that I wanted to really point out from the slide. The rest you can just read through, and it's again a very helpful checklist that I think you can use when you're actually writing down your statement. Next slide, please. Right. So just some general tips. I think this already covers things that we've talked about. Just very specifically follow the prompt, which is different for every application, for every department, for every scholarship that you're applying to. Yeah, don't copy paste whether it's from the department website or anywhere else. Yeah, that's just, I think, stating the obvious, but don't do that. Be simple. Again, you don't have to use fancy language, but just make sure that it's error-free. Next slide, please. Yeah, so again, be personal, research before writing, tell them about yourself, your passion, let your passion shine through that statement. Don't be afraid to, really show them why you want to do this degree. And show them, so when you're creating your story, you need to show them why it's this particular degree, this particular scholarship, this particular program. So, for that, you need to be very well researched and show them how this particular thing that you're pursuing, this will add value, and how it fits in with your previous experience and how it's going to add value. And it ties in very well with your future aspirations. And the last thing that I would like to mention over here is that, again, so proofread, of course, review. You'll have your mentors as well. But even if you want to go to other people just for proofreading and the sort of technical editing part of it, feel free to do that. And you can also, aside from your mentor, I think, so for instance, in my case, when I was applying, I just randomly searched up my degree on LinkedIn and I found a couple of people who were doing that. And I hit them up and they were actually super helpful and super kind. So, don't be afraid to reach out to people. Even if you don't know them, you can very politely and very, just sort of nicely reach out to them. And there's a chance that they might be able to help you and might be able to give you tips that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of. So just don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help when you're done with your statement and when you've done all your research. So I think that's it from me. Over to Hassan.
Hello everyone, I hope you all are well. So letter of recommendations are a bit tricky part of the application, especially for students who go to public sector universities in Pakistan, right? And there are two reasons for that, right? First reason is that teachers are typically unwilling to write the letter of recommendation. वो आपसे कहेंगे हमारे पास वक्त नहीं है या कुछ और कर लो या लिख के ले आओ हम साइन कर देंगे and all of that stuff. And the second reason is that the class size is huge, right? So for students who go in public universities, like 50 plus बच्चे हर class के अंदर होते हैं. And so it becomes very difficult for the teacher to individually know students and then write their letter of recommendations. And as like the third point says, that someone who has a longer and more meaningful relationship with you should be able to write that letter of recommendation. So how do you prepare for it, right? How do you make sure that you have strong letters of recommendation? There are a couple of things you can do. One is build a relationship with your teachers, right? And how do you do that? You do that by, for instance, going in office hours and talking to them about your interests, talking to them about the field, what is happening in your field as well, asking if you can help in any research project that they might have going on. So like use the office hours to get to know the work of your teacher or your professor, and also like make sure that he knows that what kind of work that you are interested in. And so if you have that relationship with your professors, then they will be able to write a very specific or very focused letter of recommendation. So during your undergraduate degree or during your master's degree, try to build a relationship with your professors beyond the classroom, right? In which you use the office hours, you discuss different things that are going on, the things that interest you and the opportunities that are there in the field, and not just make it like a relationship based on grades, right? Ke grades zyada karte hain, marks kam aa gaye, ye ho gaya, which typically students do. So one, for good letters of recommendation, get to know your professors, go in office hours, talk to them, get to know them. But let's say that ऐसा नहीं हो सकता है, you are at the end of your degree, and so you don't know how do you get the letters of recommendation. So the practice that you have to do in that case is to write it yourself, right? And that is one thing that this is a big issue, because teachers in public sector universities, even in some private universities in Pakistan, will not be like putting in the effort to write that letter of recommendation for you. So in that case, what you will have to do is what a lot of people, I remember when I was applying for Fulbright, did was like they wrote the letters of recommendations themselves, or they asked a friend to write them. This is not ideal, obviously, but it does give you a chance to sort of write down what you want to be sort of highlighted in that particular context. What you can do is to ask your sort of friend to write that particular letter and then just get it signed by the teacher, or get it sort of, like sent to that email with the admission email. And in that way, you can sort of go through that. If you're asking, like, for instance, your employer or even your professor for a letter of recommendation, one of the best practices is to like attach your CV and a draft of your personal statement, right? And also the program that you are applying for, because in that case, they will have sort of a sense of what to write or what attributes of your personality, of your work to highlight that goes in contrast with the program that support your application, right? So the biggest sort of drawback of your letter of recommendation can be that they are very general. So they don't provide the admission committee, or they don't provide the people who are selecting for the scholarship a context or more information about your degree or about your sort of the thing you want to do. And a lot of times, for instance, I was doing a course in virtual university, and I asked for like a letter of recommendation in psychology, and all that letter mentioned was, the medium of instruction is English, and this is his GPA, and he has done well. And now these letter of recommendations, these might just fill up the requirement, but they don't advance your cause. So essentially, think of a letter of recommendation as a letter or a text which advances your case in front of the admission committee, and it helps if the letter has information that cannot be seen elsewhere in your statement or in your, for instance, GPA or whatever. So statements like, this is GPA, this is the courses that he took. They already know that because they have the transcript. So how does the letter become more personalized? So it's better if, for instance, you are asking someone, if someone has agreed to write the letter yourself, tell them what program you're applying to, show them a draft of your personal statement and your CV, and just tell them what aspects do you want to be highlighted. And so in that way, a good letter of recommendation can be written. And again, a teacher who's willing to write that letter of recommendation for you would be a teacher that you have known well through your work, through your interaction. And also, again, remember that because of the workload that teachers have to tell them well in advance कि मुझे मिसाल के तौर पर 1 महीने में या 2 महीने में लेटर ऑफ रिकमेंडेशन चाहिए. मतलब आप ये ना करें कि कल डेडलाइन और आप कहें कि write me a letter of recommendation and do stuff like that. So it's a good practice to like inform your professors and in fact ask their consent if they would be willing to or open to or have the space to write a letter of recommendation. And so in that sense, give them time to sort of write the letter up, because good writing, especially good letters of recommendation, take a lot of time. And so be mindful of their time as well, and go forward in that particular scenario. Next slide, please. Yes. So the best sort of practice to have a writing sample or have an essay especially if you're applying for a master's program or a PhD program, is to essentially write a thesis, right, in your undergraduate degree or in your master's degree. There are many universities in Pakistan which like allow you to graduate without doing a thesis, and many students do that. But that means that you don't have sort of neither the research experience per se or the sort of writing experience, academic writing experience of going through that. So one advice that I can give in building up that writing sample or building up that essay is to opt for a thesis in your degree and work closely with a supervisor or with a professor, and then through that supervision, one, you will have research experience, and two, you will have a writing sample. And again, a writing sample is something which you should ideally submit after it has been commented upon by your professors or by your supervisor or anything else, right? So you can think about your dissertation or your thesis as something which can be submitted as a writing sample. Now, again, remember that there are certain limitations of writing samples as well, right? So for instance, many schools would say that, we need a writing sample of maximum of 10 pages. So if that is the case, don't just upload all of your thesis, which is of like, I don't know, 100 or 110 words, because they will not be able to read all of it, right? So try to edit your thesis or try to send one chapter that is of that particular length that shows, one, your ability to critically engage with the ideas, two, your ability to use correct language or correct academic language of that particular area, three, your ability to engage with the philosophical or intellectual discussions of your field, and four, your ability to sort of cite it in a way that is according to whatever citation system is in your particular field, right? अगर आप humanities के अंदर हैं तो probably MLA के मुताबिक आपने से cite करना है. अगर आप social sciences में हैं तो probably APA works in psychology, I think. So cite it well, right? Use the correct citational system. Also make sure that it follows the instructions that are on the application portal. So आप जिस भी university में apply कर रहे हैं, जिस भी college में जिस भी scholarship के लिए apply कर रहे हैं, they would have like written specific instructions about the writing sample that they want. Make sure you comply with those instructions, because if you don't do that, then if, for instance, the length of the paper is more, they will not read more than 10 pages. And a lot of the times, it is possible that shuru ke 10 pages ke andar you have not been able to build a good case for your research or for your arguments. And so that is something that can happen. Similarly, you have, for instance, already published a paper. If it has been published after peer review, like double-blind peer review, then it is a good idea to sort of use that paper to submit as a writing sample. If you're applying, for instance, for like an MFA, which is for creative writing or painting or stuff like that, then the writing sample is central to your application, right? So in that sense, hopefully Project EduAccess will be able to link you with the right mentor, but make sure that the writing sample that they're asking complies with the artistic sort of demands of your particular field. Next slide, please. Yeah, so GRE is something which haunts so many people, which restricts so many people. And again, there has been a lot of discourse in America about, is GRE really a mark of sort of academic excellence, or is it something which marginalizes underprivileged students or underrepresented students within the academia, especially from minorities, especially from other sort of marginalized aspects. That being said, a lot of universities still require, especially PhD programs or programs which are heavy on the quantitative side. But remember that ये हवा मतलब इस तरह की कोई चीज नहीं है जो हो नहीं सकती, right? Or it is impossible to happen. One of the things that you should start with as you are like sort of thinking about GRE or preparing for GRE is to give a mock exam. अब mock exam अगर आप ETS की website पे जाएं तो you can give it for free, right? You can just download the software and give that mock exam. और उससे आपको अंदाजा हो जाएगा कि आप कहाँ पे खड़े हैं, right? What is your current score? And again, remember, GRE is a test of abilities and skills that you have acquired over a long time, which means your undergraduate degree, right? So it is possible that you already know a lot of things that are within the GRE sort of landscape. So do give that mock exam. It's ETS, the website that like जिसके ऊपर आप जाके register करते हैं. So do give that mock exam, because then you would know what is the score where you currently stand. It is also a good idea to give it twice. क्योंकि कई दफा like sometimes your answers guess की बुनियाद पे भी ठीक हो जाते हैं. So that you sort of know कि आप कहाँ पे खड़े हैं, right? आपको ये एहसास ना हो कि मुझे कुछ भी नहीं आता, right? मैं बस खला में this existential space. So once you have those results, then go to the websites of your school and see what do they require, right? अब मिसाल के तौर पर अगर कोई English literature का school है, तो they don't care कि आपका quantitative में क्या score है, right? They would be more dependent upon your qualitative score and your analytical score, right? Similarly, if it's like more like a business studies school, they don't necessarily want a 165 on qualitative, right? They would prefer a good score on quantitative, and you can get by on an average score on qualitative, or yeah. So a lot of students जिनसे मैं बात करता हूँ कहते हैं कि मुझे मैथ नहीं आता, तो मैं GRE नहीं दे सकता या दे सकती. It is important to learn math, but at the same time also be aware that your field, especially if it's humanities, it might not demand that much of a score in mathematics. So you can get a reasonable score based upon some primary preparation as well. Secondly, I think a lot of the GRE preparation books are overly complicated, right? वो आपको पहले से डरा देती हैं कि इतना मुश्किल है और ये हो जाएगा वो हो जाएगा. A book personally that I found very sort of very illuminating, very simple, but at the same time very sort of informative as well was I think it was Cracking GRE by Princeton Review. And the books that I reviewed or used or tried to use, I think that book was probably one of the best ones in like breaking down the components of GRE and GRE processes. So again, do your own research, but this is the book that worked for me when I was preparing for the GRE exam and sort of going forward with that. And again, remember to measure your performance, right? After 2 weeks, after a month, whenever it is, like, do make sure that you have a sense of, are you progressing in the direction of your necessary school or not? And again, I think GRE is mostly used in the US or maybe in some universities in Canada. So this test is something which you should think about if you're considering graduate school in the US, or specifically graduate school in universities that require the GRE, right? So I know business schools have a mandatory requirement of very good GRE score. A lot of these hard sciences have the requirement of like a good GRE score. So know what the requirement of the GRE score is of the school that you want to go to. Know where you are currently, अभी आप कहाँ पे खड़े हैं, और उससे आपको अंदाजा हो जाएगा कि आपको कितना वक्त लगाना है GRE की तैयारी करने में, right? Maybe it is possible you're already there, right? In that case, maybe go through the book, see the patterns, and then that would be fine. But if it is like a margin of 10 to 15, then you probably need a month or two to sort of cover that pattern or to cover all of that stuff. I also want to talk about the cost of GRE because, again, that is one of the reasons. That it is a systematic barrier for a lot of people. When I was applying for Fulbright, the US EFP had this program in which they would give GRE vouchers to public sector university graduates. But now it's more like, okay, if you are selected, then the vouchers will be given to those candidates. So if, again, you're applying for US universities, you also have to financially plan for, GRE. And then again, if you end up, paying for GRE, make sure that you know which schools you're applying for. I think if you send the scores on the day of the test, it's free for 4 schools, but like if you do it later, it's like $10 or $20 for that particular case. So like it does require a lot of financial planning as well. If you come from a low income background, and so make sure that you have the necessary resources to sort of pay for the test. And again, it also requires advanced booking as well. So in that sense, for instance, जब Fulbright का time आता है तो वो सारा I think आप जो test जो deadline है उसके इतनी सारी slots fill हो जाती हैं. So again, follow the steps, give the mock GRE, know what score you currently stand at, know what score you need for the university that you want to work at, and then sort of उस हिसाब से आप GRE का test book कर सकते हैं, right? So these are not unlimited seats, these are limited seats. And again, these are sort of the systematic barriers thing जिसकी वजह से there has been a lot of criticism on how GRE sort of marginalizes underrepresented student bodies. And that criticism, again, it is important to be aware of that criticism as well, so that you sort of situate or contextualize your difficulty within the proper systematic thing. We can, if you have more questions, we can talk about that in the question and answer section as well. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so again, I think it's a good idea अगर आप graduate school पे apply कर रहे हैं to sort of have this Excel sheet जिसके ऊपर you list the name of the universities, you list on the next tab you list the application links, and then on the next tab you sort of list क्या कहते हैं how far you are along in your application progress. आपने SOP लिख लिया, आपने review के लिए भेज दिया है, आपको documents कौन कौन से चाहिए और सारा कुछ. So it's very, very important to be very organized, especially in graduate school. अगर आप PhD के लिए apply कर रहे हैं या masters के लिए apply कर रहे हैं, because you will be applying at a lot of universities, at a lot of scholarships, and it is very easy to sort of get boggled down. Okay, and as someone else mentioned in the previous presentation as well, कि आप एक SOP को हर जगह नहीं चला सकते, because different scholarship bodies, different departments have different intellectual sort of requirements or different demographic requirements, in fact. So make an Excel sheet और उसके ऊपर आप सारे schools लिखें जहाँ जहाँ आपने apply करना है. आप ये भी लिखें कि ये funded है या नहीं है, आपने funding के लिए कैसे apply करना है in the next tab. And so you can make tabs, and so you can also track your progress in that particular case, and also make a tab of like, uploading the documents. Have you uploaded the documents? Have you submitted the documents? And again, be very, very mindful, because जैसे जैसे deadline करीब आती है, the websites A lot of the times, because of the huge traffic that is generated, they get hung up. So it's a good idea if you submit it 1 or 2 days before the sort of deadline. Again, easier said than done. I have never done it. I always submit on the last day. लेकिन अगर आप मेरे तजर्बे से सीख सकते हैं तो सीख लें. But like fair disclaimer, I have never done it. But yeah, so this is sort of whole process. First you do the research, then you sort of fill up the form. Based upon the documents, again, you have to collect the documents, बहुत सारे documents, and I think Erasmus made you need like a police certificate or something, which again is totally unnecessary, but what can you do? And then sort of upload the documents. And sometimes, again, in case of TOEFL or GRE, it's not just that you have to upload the documents, it's also that the agency needs to send the scores to that particular school. So again, that is something as well to keep in mind कि ये चीज भी हो सकती है कि आपको करना. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there are typically a lot of fundings that you can apply for. I think in the case of US, probably US is the country where the scholarships are more generous in the sense that universities have their own scholarships, and then there are agencies like Fulbright, and which give the certain scholarships. So again, keep a track of the scholarships of the agencies that gives those scholarships, and give those fundings as well. In the case of UK, for instance, like obviously there is a Shielding scholarship, but there is also a scholarship which is, I think, the Great Scholarship, which like slashes off £10,000 of your tuition. So that again is something to keep an eye on. And one of the ways in which you can do that is to find the central agency in every country or in every region that gives those scholarships, right? So अगर आप मिसाल के तौर पर UK में apply कर रहे हैं, तो you should follow the British Council page, right? क्योंकि वहाँ पे ये सारी scholarships आ जाती हैं और उनके पेज के ऊपर लिखा भी होता है. And again, they tell about the people who have gotten those scholarships. They also post their profiles as well. So you can also, as someone had mentioned before, get in touch with those people और उनसे आप बात कर सकते हैं कि कैसे आपने स्कॉलरशिप लिया, अपने एप्लीकेशन के अंदर क्या लिखे. Again, read very, very carefully about each scholarship and what is its purpose, right? कि वो किस मकसद के लिए स्कॉलरशिप दे रहे हैं, right? अगर वो ग्रेड स्कॉलरशिप है, अगर वो शील्डिंग स्कॉलरशिप है, what is its point, right? They're not just giving it because you're talented, right? Like if I become a bit more frank, Fulbright, for instance, वो इसलिए नहीं देते कि सिर्फ कि आप बहुत ज़हीन हैं ये स्कॉलरशिप में और अमेरिका पढ़ने चले जाएं, right? It's given as a tool of foreign policy so that US can contribute towards Pakistani society in a particular way. And this is important because now in your application, you सिर्फ आपने अपना academic merit नहीं दिखाना, but you also have to show that what you want to do aligns with the purpose of that particular organization. तो आप इन सारी ऑप्शन में से जिस भी यूनिवर्सिटी में अप्लाई करेंगे, जिस भी स्कॉलरशिप के लिए अप्लाई करेंगे, रीड वेरी वेरी केयरफुली कि वो ये स्कॉलरशिप क्यों दे रहे हैं, right? What is the world that they want to see, or what is the difference they want to make in the world through these scholarships, and then try to align your statements, your goals, your applications towards that particular. Next slide, please. Yeah, and a lot of the times, this is more true for if you're applying in European universities for PhD. So, and again, we can talk about it more in the question and answer session. There, the department-specific scholarships are very much there. So how you can, sometimes it's not known, a lot of the times it is listed on the website. So if you are talking to the supervisor, which is important in case of PhD in like continental Europe, then do ask about the funding right away as well, right? So what are the chances of being funded for this program, for this particular degree, and then what organizations provide the particular scholarship for graduate studies for students in that particular thing. A lot of the times, in the case of, for instance, US, the department always funds the PhD students, but sometimes that is not the case, right? UK के अंदर, I know that it's very difficult to sort of get a PhD scholarship. And so that is a decision that you need to make, right? Are you comfortable pursuing a PhD without a scholarship, doing part-time work, or are you sort of, we want a funded PhD? And so it's very important to, especially in the case of PhD, to get to know the department that you're applying for, right? See what professors are working there, one, and then what grants have they been able to avail in order to fund their work, right? And so if you are to work with them, do they have the financial resources to sort of fund your PhD and fund your stay in that particular lab, right? So again, get to know the department very well in terms of where does it receive its funding, what is the research interest, what is the project that this department particularly has, and then how do you fit in that intellectual / financial picture as well, right? So I think this is all from my side. Is it? Or do I have to cover this slide as well?
I think there are just 2 more slides for you to get through. This one, the college funding and university funding.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, I can.
Just very briefly, probably, and then we can switch to the PhD part.
Yeah, absolutely. So in these slides as well, it's basically the stuff we have covered so far. But again, be mindful of funding and, what are the sort of politics of that funding as well, right? Again, it is possible that the research area that you are interested in does not get funded or does not have the relevant sort of backing, institutional backing that you want for your PhD, right? In that case, it is ideal that you find a university where that particular project or research interest is funded. But if that is not the case, then try to find sort of an area in which you can work, in which your skills allow you to work, in which you can sort of work in a lab or in a particular project, which is something which already has the backing of, for instance, the research councils or all of these things that we're talking about, right? So for instance, in Fulbright, when I was reviewing the applications, you get extra 5 points if it is something which is related to climate change, education, health, and then 2 or other subjects which I don't remember right now. So some areas are always going to receive much more funding, right, than other areas. And it is highly beneficial for your case if you can align your research interests or research objectives with those areas, because then it gives you an edge in terms of getting funded or getting a particular thing, right? You can always work on your interest on the side when you have institutional backing or institutional funding. But at the same time, it is very important as PhD students to sort of get that funding and, get forward in that case. But yeah, this is all I have to say. So we can go to the.
Thank you, Hassan. Musa, you have the floor. And for those of you who are asking, I'm sorry that we are running over the time that we initially indicated for this session, but it's likely to go on for another 15-20 minutes, including the Q&A. Okay, that said, Musa, you have the floor.
Yes, so it's important to know the difference between dot degrees and research degrees. So in a place like Oxford, you tend to have MScs or MSTs or MLits in some cases that tend to be 1-year degrees. And in these 1-year degrees, you attend regular classes, in your subjects of interest. And at the end of the year, you'll sit for exams in these subjects. And while a lot of master's degrees have a dissertation component, the dot component always dominates such degrees. So I did an MSc where last year, and in that MSc, I did initially assume that there would be a lot of the focus on my own research. But really, in most MScs, you only get to touch your own research in the summer or in the last few months of the course. So if you're doing a 1-year master's, just be very, very cognizant of the fact that you're not going to have a lot of time to do your own research. So, but on the other hand, in a research degree like a PhD or a DPhil, in an MPhil, it's relatively similar as well, in the sense that you still have a lot of a gigantic dot component and then maybe a longer time to do your research. But in a PhD or a DPhil, there's very limited emphasis on teaching, which means that you're most likely not going to have coursework, especially if you're in the social sciences or humanities. If you are in, if you're in the natural sciences, you might have regular lab rotations that you have to go to. So in a certain sense, there's going to be some sense of structure if you are doing maybe like a PhD in chemistry or biology. But if you're doing a PhD in so if you're doing a PhD in, let's say, history or anthropology or politics, generally anything that's social sciencey, you will most likely have to make your own schedule. And you simultaneously, in the focus of the PhD is to write a thesis on an important contemporary debate. So the entire point of a research of a PhD is to sort of intervene at a given point and then spend the next 3 to 4 years if you're in the UK, and if you're in the US, the next 6 to 8 years building upon that thesis. So, and again, like, it's most important to know that not like every country, like no research degree looks the same as the other. So each university has a different way of doing their PhDs. In Oxford, we funnily enough just call our PhDs DPhils. I don't think most people do that outside of here. But beyond that, every single department, every single country, even where 3 to 4 year PhDs are standard, tend to have different ways of running their programs. And again, like even within the social sciences, there's such a large degree of variance in terms of the expectations you have of how quickly sort of how much work you have to do or how frequently you meet your advisor. So even in Oxford, like one of the things that I found pretty surprising was the fact that you only meet your supervisor about 6 to 7 times a year. So it's a very, very independently run system in the UK compared to the US, which is much more hands-on. Next slide, please. So yeah, in regards to the PhD application, you have several options that are available to you. When pursuing or applying for a PhD, again, like the variation between the 4 divisions that we mentioned earlier is pretty gigantic, in the sense that option 1 is that you could apply for a funded PhD where you research a set project at a university. So this is similar to a job application. You would probably find options like this in economics or the natural sciences, but you wouldn't necessarily find these options in history or pol sci or anthropology. So this type of entryway into a PhD program is very, very limited to the natural sciences. Secondly, you could theoretically design your own research project and apply through the normal PhD process. This is usually what you have to do if you're applying for social sciences or humanities. So the research proposal here is the central part of your PhD application. So it's a very independently run PhD, as I described earlier. You can also convert a research assistantship with a professor into a full-time PhD. Again, this is a very natural sciencey way of going about it. I know a couple of people who worked in lab rotations after completing their bachelor's. They didn't even do a master's, and they were able to start a PhD through that particular lab. And similarly, that departmental funding also comes through when you approach it through the lab route. So some universities and PhD programs expect you to first reach out to a potential supervisor and run your ideas past them. This is mostly standard practice when it comes to applying for most PhDs. You're expected to reach out to a potential supervisor. You're expected to get them on board. And often when you get them on board, that's a very, very good sign that you might get into the program, in the sense that when they like your project, they're also likelier to vouch for you when it comes to the application process. So this is the fine little thing about the PhD. You can often know if you actually get into the program like months before you actually even apply, just if you get the right kind of professor in your corner right before. So let me see. Oh, sorry, can you explain the application regarding MSc by Research program? The MSc by Research program, I think, is more similar to a research degree than it is a regular MSc. It's somewhere between an MPhil and an MSc, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong about this. I think the MSc by Research also tends to be offered more so in natural sciences or quant-heavy courses. I've only come across them in those particular contexts. In the MSc by Research, I also just think that there's a larger focus on research as opposed to the taught nature of the course. So probably a decent enough balance between the two, more so focus on research than other MSCs that are offered in UK universities. So yeah, lastly, so some universities don't require you to contact a potential supervisor in advance. So the interesting thing here is that even though you should reach out to a potential supervisor, you can still apply for a PhD. I didn't reach out to, I did reach out to potential supervisors, but the one I was assigned is not someone that I reached out to before. You can still very much get in with funding through this route. It's just that it's a harder route to get through, in the sense that, especially when it comes to UK funding and departmental funding and funding from these different agencies, it's in your best interest to try to get a supervisor in your corner and then apply. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have one before you apply, but it's highly recommended. Next slide, please. So yeah, so in order to apply for a PhD, there's a certain amount of things that your application actually needs before you can get to a stage where A, you get in, and B, you get in with funding. So over here, like the expectations would be that you undertake rigorous independent research in your field of study before applying in the first place. So therefore you should be able to show that you have good research skills. So good academic grades don't necessarily matter when it comes to PhD applications. I mean, they very much matter in terms of maybe getting you past like the first or second stage, but you in order to get an edge over other applicants, your CV and your research proposal tend to matter a lot. And in a certain sense, you have to build up your CV and your profile for a PhD by engaging in certain things that show that you are prepared to undertake a PhD. And in certain cases, that can be obviously through pursuing research assistantships with professors in your field of study. This can be harder if you're in the humanities, because there are not a lot of research assistantships out there. But if you are in the humanities, you can apply for research grants and pursue independent work. That's another way of showing that you're ready to do a PhD. You can also pursue research internships. So these can be, I think, at think tanks and policy related places. You tend to have a lot of research assistantship and research internship opportunities already available to you if you are in the natural sciences. But if you're not, again, you have various organizations that take research interns, and that ultimately does help. Publishing articles and blogs independently and in journals is very important. Pursuing a research degree before you apply for PhD is very important. In the UK, it's standard to have done a master's or an MPhil before you apply for a PhD. In certain departments, you can get by without having one, but especially if you are coming from Pakistan, it's pretty important that for you to have already done a bachelor's and a master's. So all of those tend to really help. Similarly, work experience and teaching positions all kind of go hand in hand in like creating the best profile that you can for a PhD. Next slide. Yeah. So a PhD thesis needs to make an original contribution to existing knowledge. So fundamentally, your research proposal must be an intervention in your field. It must be unique in a certain way. That's why specificity tends to matter a lot when you're applying for a PhD. So you're trying to look for something that hasn't necessarily been researched, and that's usually the hook that you have to give to professors when you're so that's the hook you have to give to professors when you're reaching out to them in the first place, that I like the work that you've done, and this is my unique take on it. So coming up with that idea can be a very daunting task, but it's the necessary first step that anybody interested in doing a PhD must take. And again, just a lot, the easiest way to maybe get to that question can be through wide reading, or just general curiosity leading to, again, more wide reading, and then that eventually leading to a larger question that you want to ask. So these can come from looking at other projects, which will probably mention areas for further research, brainstorming with fellow students. In a PhD, your peers are your best friends because you can meet your peers more often than you can meet your own professor and your own supervisor. So brainstorming with fellow students tends to help a lot, even before you get into a PhD, in the ideation process. So conversations with practitioners, colleagues, potential users of the research. So I know that somebody mentioned that reaching out to people that are through LinkedIn who've already done this. All those conversations tend to help. Personal interest is obviously essential. If you don't necessarily like the topic that you're doing, you're going to get burnt out very, very quickly. And most PhD students do get burnt out because obviously if you're spending 3 to 4 years studying the same thing, it becomes relatively isolating, and that's why the personal interest in the topic tends to matter a lot. Similarly, a work interest, meaning like seeing a road for this particular project outside of academia, or seeing it within work, tends to help as well. And again, like anything that you're carrying forward from your previous study, you can develop your undergraduate thesis or your master's thesis into a larger PhD proposal. Most people I know tend to actually work on their turn their master's dissertations into PhD dissertations. So all of that tends to help when it's all combined. And again, like as I mentioned earlier, reading the literature surrounding the topic is the most essential part. Next slide. So yeah, the research proposal is a central part of any PhD application. It's important to note that the research proposal is not a standard document. And the SOP can be considered a relatively standard document. Most places often require an SOP that's between 1,000 to 1,500 words. The research proposal, even if your topic is interdisciplinary and you can pursue it in different departments, every single department in every single university has a different word limit or expectation or weightage that they place on the research proposal itself. So I think for the DPhil in law, it's a 600-word document. For the DPhil in history, it's a 1,000-word document. For the DPhil in anthropology, it's 2,000. For the DPhil in politics, it's 4,000. So just the sheer amount of variation can show you how much emphasis certain departments place on this particular document. Because fundamentally, what's going to get you into the PhD is the research proposal. It's your CV and your overall profile. So it's important to note that you can't create a standard research proposal. You should probably look into every department and what the requirements are before you actually apply. So these proposals are usually assessed on their quality, originality, and coherence. So originality is very, very important, but coherence and structure are equally important, in the sense that more than anything else, when people are looking at a PhD, they're looking for a PhD proposal, they're looking for structure, and they're looking for clarity of thought within a specific idea that you want to research. So again, like this will help give reviewers a clear sense of how prepared you are for doctoral research, because fundamentally what they're looking for is whether or not the student is ready to undertake a PhD. And again, like since the process, how long should the PhD proposal be? Again, so that's the thing. It varies so much by department. So for example, when I applied for PhDs, I applied to only anthropology departments at LSE, Cambridge and Oxford. And then I also applied to history at Oxford. So history at Oxford was 1,000 words long. Anthro at Oxford was 2,000 words long. Anthro at Cambridge was 2,500 words long, and then LSE was 3,000 words long. So it varies so much that you're going to have to write different documents for different faculties and different universities. So any rough idea about a PhD in chemistry? I think I'll answer some of these at the end. But again, like since the process of drafting research proposal involves careful reflection on your intended research, it will help you clarify your idea and make conducting research easier when you start your PhD. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the general structure that a PhD tends to cover. Obviously, you need to have your title and introduction. The title. So I think I'll answer the questions at the end, because this is we're about to finish. Then don't worry. So within the PhD proposal, number one, obviously, title and introduction. It's not fundamental, but you want to have a nice name to kind of draw the readers in. Number two is your statement of problem or research questions. This isn't exactly you can vary some of these within your own research project. But the research questions that so statement of problem and research questions tend to focus on, again, like what the issue at hand seems to be, and then simultaneously, what are your questions, or what are the things that you intend to explore within your actual PhD? The literature review section, and again, like the length of this depends entirely on how long your PhD proposal can be. Because, for example, if you have a very, very short PhD proposal of a limit of 600 words, like I think the DPhil in law does, you can't necessarily dedicate lots and lots of words to each of these sections. And you can also combine them in certain places as well. The bibliography and references don't count towards the word count. So you can have as long a bibliography as you want, but everything else has to be constrained within those word limits. So the literature review, again, looking at relevant literature, seeing how engaged you are. This is important because it shows, it's another way that they can gauge if you're academically prepared or not. If you've done a wide reading, they know that this person knows what they're talking about and hence knows that so they knows what they're talking about and knows how, knows the intervention that they're going to make is useful. Methodology is very, very important, especially if you're applying to a traditional department. If you're applying to a interdisciplinary department, you can use mixed method research, and that can end up, making your application stronger. But if you're applying to maybe something with a very, very rigid expectation of what the methodology must be, you need to show that what you intend to do in this research project is A, feasible, and B, falls under the scope of what the department is actually capable of doing. And some of this you can gauge from the website, and some of this you can gauge through conversations with people that are actually doing PhDs in that given department. Significance is just emphasizing that your research work is important and that your research work these are the benefits that you can gain. Over here, you can actually talk about your larger term goals. These don't necessarily need to be long, but they just need to show why your research is important and how it will bring benefit to the wider, even academia, but even how the wider community as a whole. So maybe a larger benefit for Pakistan through your research, and you can add a couple of lines here and there about that. Timeline, showcasing how you can actually get it done in the time that you have, because you only have 3 to 4 years in a UK PhD. Your funding tends to cover 3. So again, this is a very important section for folks that are trying to get in. Plan for analysis / field plan. I think some of this can also come into your timeline. So your timeline can focus on, what your plan and your field site plans tend to be. 8, ethical concerns. Just a small section on how you can address the ethical issues that could come up through your research. And 9, your bibliography. So just a long list of the sources that you've used. I can't speak for all the other departments, but I know that if you're applying for a PhD in history or generally in the social sciences, it's better to aim for maybe 40 to 50 citations in a 1,000-word document. So that it's a decent amount. You don't necessarily 20 to 30 is also okay, but the more the better, because the more you have, the more it shows that you actually know what you're talking about. So yeah, I think next slide. Yeah. Yeah, so general tips on PhD applications. Number 1, when you're applying, you want to have researched the universities before anything else. So, before you start drafting a research proposal, you need to know that the PhD programs you're applying to have supervisors that align with your research interests. So a simple example of this could be that if you're doing history at Oxford, if you're applying for history at Oxford versus history at Cambridge, there are more people that maybe tend to focus on Pakistan at Oxford than Cambridge. Or if you're applying to study maybe Androon Punjab or some kind of 1940s Androon Punjab, something of that sort. Theoretically, you'd have more supervisors that could align with your interest, who are focusing on colonial times at this one university over the other. So always looking over the websites and over the supervisor profiles that you have, that tends to help as well. So again, going back to the significance point, making sure that your research question is worth pursuing. You can't assume that a potential supervisor will care, even if they tend to care about the same themes. If you're both focused on colonial history, you can't necessarily expect them to also be interested in the thing that you want to do. You need to run it by them, and that's why reaching out to them before tends to help. Again, number 3, focusing on specificity, focusing on a narrow and detailed project, because focusing on a narrow and detailed project will make you stand out more. Because you don't, in a PhD, the entire point is to focus on a series of questions, but a smaller topic. So just saying that you want to study something broad, or you want to do like history of Punjab 1900 to 1970, that's too broad a topic and too broad a region for anyone to actually care. You should probably go into more specifics. That tends to help. Number 4, clear and coherent structure. So even following like the previous slide structure for a PhD proposal, that will help you come up with a PhD proposal. That's very, very important. And again, like even though there were 9 sections in that PhD proposal, you should really, really focus on the research question side, the methodology side, and then generally just describing the project. The ethical concerns or the timeline, you can dedicate less words to those, but actually describing the meat of your project is the most important part when it comes to a PhD proposal. And refine and edit your proposal a number of times. Again, like refining it, editing it, proofreading it always helps. Like Hassan, I also worked on my application pretty last minute, so I wasn't necessarily able to do that. But again, the more you can get it proofread, the more you can get it edited, it'll obviously just benefit you if you submit something that's been refined and worked on, as opposed to something that you wrote like 2 nights before the application. Having an appropriate format, citations, following university guidelines, all of those are very, very important. And just check the university website to verify if you are doing all of this before submitting anything. And lastly, and most importantly, you're not expected to know everything about your PhD topic at this stage. You just need to know enough to get you in. So, and I think if you just follow these steps, you can probably show to the reviewers that you do know enough to get you in. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, I think we're done now. So questions?
Great, thank you so much all. I think that initial presentation was comprehensive enough that we addressed most of the questions that came through the chat, but I believe there are still a few that went unanswered. So I'm going to try putting a few of those to you now. On the research proposal, since we just stopped there, Musa, there are a few who are asking precisely how long should the lit review be in the research proposal? And also there's another person who's saying, what happens if you don't really have any prior research experience in that specific topic that you want to do your PhD on? How do you convince your supervisor that it's still a good idea for you to research that topic?
So in regards to the literature review question, again, it varies, but I'd say that if your research proposal is 1,000 words long and you have maybe 4 or 5 sections to address, keeping the lit review to maybe 200 or 300 words is the best, is what I would do. I'd also have to go over my own research proposal to verify if that's indeed what I did, but I would say that your focus should largely be on what you intend to investigate and then the questions that you are going to ask. And again, like having a decent amount of methodology is also important. So and 1,000 words are not a lot, but so I try to get every single thing done as opposed to focusing too much on the literature review. So what was the second question?
About not having prior research experience on that topic that they ultimately want to do their PhD in. Is that going to be a problem? And how do you convince your supervisor that it's okay for you to do that?
Well, so I don't think you need to necessarily convince your supervisor of whether or not it's okay for you to do that, because a lot of people tend to research something in the PhD that they haven't necessarily done before. Some people continue on with the research, some people start anew. So when you're emailing a potential supervisor, always just make your topic seem interesting. Because more than anything else, if they agree to your topic, then they'll agree to you subsequently. They don't necessarily need to agree to you and then your topic, because you're trying to hook them on your topic and not necessarily on your profile. If you are somebody with a background in history, and you've never researched this type of history, it doesn't necessarily matter because you still have that background in history. If you are a chemistry student, and your focus is on organic chemistry, now you want to do inorganic chemistry. Again, it doesn't necessarily matter because you still have the fundamental background needed to actually go into this research.
Thank you, Musa. I don't know if any of our panelists have had experience with the Europass CV creation. You do, Hassan. So there's someone here with a question about like our recommendation that the CV be limited to 2 pages. They're saying the Europass CV usually goes on to 4 to 5 pages. Would you recommend then that we somehow reduce the Europass CV to 2 pages nevertheless, or is it okay if we just use the 4 to 5 page one? And which one of these 2 types of CVs should we use at Oxbridge?
I cannot tell about Oxbridge, but typically in Europe, this is accepted. So I did make a CV on Europass. And the advice that I have received from here is it's better if it's reduced to 2 pages. So one of the things you can sort of remove is, for instance, if you on the Europass you click the languages section, like it takes up like half of the page based upon C2, C1, stuff like that. So do remove that. There's no need to mention, for instance, where did you did your intermediate from or stuff like that. So again, mention the most relevant things that are related to your credibility and eligibility as a graduate student related to the department. So this means, for instance, mentioning any publications that you have done or any presentations you have done, what was your, for instance, thesis was on, and your academic degrees. But 2 pages is more than enough, because if it's more, then a lot of the times the more important information is sort of scattered and not received well.
Thank you, Hassan. And then from what I know, Oxbridge, they do recommend that you use 2-page CVs, but at the same time, like try checking what your course requires you to do. If your course website says it's okay for it to be longer than 2 pages, then that's fine. But mostly in Oxbridge, from what I've seen, they do recommend 2-page CVs. Okay, we have a raised hand. So how about we give the floor to Amna to ask that question?
Thank you so much. My question is regarding, I would like to do PhD in English. And I just wanted to ask that, what if in the research proposal, we add pilot study, like before doing the research, we conduct a little pilot study in that, and the length, because of the pilot study, of course, the length would be increased. So would that be okay? Is that recommended, or just a simple research proposal is okay with that?
So you can, I don't think a pilot study is, you can mention that you would like to do a pilot study, right, in this particular thing. If you're already doing the pilot study, then that can come under what you have done for, preparing yourself for the project, right? So that can be, you can mention that within the introduction section or background section. And again, research proposal is not required everywhere. For instance, अगर आप US में apply कर रही हैं, so it's more like a research statement, right? What you would like to do and how your skills match with that particular thing. So you can briefly mention that you have done this, but it's not needed that you mention all of the things that I've done the study or उसका ये result है और उसके ये participants थे और सारा कुछ, right? So that would be my sort of comment on that.
And what if, like, since my work previously during the MPhil is in political discourse, right? If I have to continue that political discourse, but in the context of UK political background or the USA political background, would that be okay? Or they would be saying, like, the supervisor might question that, no, you should, it could be better if you have conducted that research in your, like, the political situation of Pakistan or something like that. So we should go for the political scenario of our country, or is that okay to go for the international political background or something like that? What would you recommend?
I think you can go for anything in the sense that it really depends on what your supervisor is interested in. If you want to do, US political discourse, or if you want to do UK political discourse, pursue your interests and then find a supervisor who aligns with your interests. Because if you worked on Pakistan or if you worked on the US, that doesn't necessarily increase or decrease your chances of getting in. Because again, like even over here, I think most of the people you've talked to today are studying in the UK, but they're working on Pakistan. Or some people are, studying in the UK and working on the UK. So it all varies. It doesn't necessarily increase your chances or decrease your chances.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amna. So I should say, everyone, that the panelists have already stayed on for 30 additional minutes. So I know you have a lot of questions, but you will also have multiple opportunities to get your questions answered. Those of you who have your hands raised, I'm going to call upon one of you for now, but the rest, if you can start putting your questions in the chat, then we can get some of the panelists to answer your questions in the chat, so we are able to wrap this up quickly. So Qasim and Asad, if you can just put your questions in the chat, somebody will answer them there for you. Amna, you can ask your question now.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I just want to ask that if we are applying for the US scholarships directly into the PhD program just after doing my BS, there are also lots of competitive candidates who have already done their masters and they're applying for the PhD positions. So how we can make our application distinctive? How we can make our application better so that there can be the more chances of our selection into the PhD program than the other applicants who have already done their masters than us.
I think one of the ways to sort of think about that is you apply in multiple schools, right? And you shortlist those schools based upon that. So you will select 3 or 4 schools which you have a sure shot of getting in, right? So on schools can their competition be come over, right? And so make a list of schools that are easy to get into, that are slightly difficult to get into, that are more difficult to get into, right? And apply based upon that. Secondly, you can increase your chances by having the relevant work experience, having the relevant research experience as well, right? So try to, for instance, present in the conferences of your discipline. I know in literature, MLA or NEMLA or ACLA, American Comparative Literature Association, they have these undergraduate panels, right? So you can present on those panels and showcase your eligibility as a prospective graduate student. In the case of US, I would say that there are so many graduate programs, so you can sort of find your way in, but that might be a less sort of competitive program in which you get into. So think on those lines, finalize those graduate schools in that way, try to increase your research experience in that way. And yeah, that would be my comment.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, excellent. I don't think Qasim and Asad have mentioned their questions in the chat. But Qasim, if you want to quickly go, Asad's question is in the chat. So if one of you can take that in the chat in the meantime, Qasim can ask his question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your presentations, and it's my pleasure to be part of this mentorship. So I have some question regarding my CV recommendation letter, and because I'm already a conditional offer holder of the Department of Archaeology, University of Cambridge, and I have experience how to fill, but my application was successful, but I have it was not, application has been unsuccessful in securing my funding. So I have one question regarding my CV. Is the CV is about to 5 to 6 pages. So is it will affect to be chances to being awarded the funding award, or some I have some question about the recommendation letter. So if the recommendation letter, can you please answer for the by the first questions that I have about my CV?
Sorry, what was the question again? Do you already ask your question about the CV?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the question is about CV's length. Qasim, I don't think there is when it comes to Oxbridge, it's usually better if your CV is 2-3 pages. Usually there is no word limit or page limit for academic CVs, but it's better if it's not too lengthy. For example, 6-7 pages. I mean, they have so many assessments, so many applications to go through. They will have so many applications to assess, especially if your CV is 3 pages.
Thank you, Ali Dawood. So I have already mentioned about your name regarding. So I will need some special help maybe from you, yeah, maybe from my mentor, which will be assigned later. I think because I have already done a lot of things, and I'm a conditional offer holder. My my research has been accepted by the Department of Archaeology, and some of professors are willing to work with me in my project. So thank you, all of you, and maybe I will send an email and I will highlight all these issues in which area I need a special help. Thank you, Ali Dawood.
Thank you, Qasim. I'm going to quickly read out the last two questions that Asad has already helpfully put out in the chat. Firstly, if you have already approached a potential supervisor and they have said yes to your project, then do you mention that in your SOP or your research proposal at the time of application? And the second question is, when you're picking a potential referee to support your application, is it important what role they or like what their occupation is, etc.? Like, do they, for example, have to be the vice chancellor of the university you're studying at, or is it okay for them to have a role that's low in the hierarchy, so to say?
Sorry, what was the first question? The first question was about if you already have reached out to your potential supervisor. So I don't think you should, there's no need to mention that in your research proposal, because especially again, when it comes to Oxbridge, it's as part of your application, you have to mention in your application, there's just a section in which you have to mention if you have a particular professor you want to work with. So you don't have to mention in your research proposal, I think. And when it comes to US, I think it's better that you name a couple of people in the department that you want to work with. Not just your potential supervisor, because there's this whole thing about dissertation committee and stuff. So it's better if the more people that you can name in your SOP, the better. The second was, I don't think the hierarchy or position of your referee matters. I think what is more important is that how closely you have worked with them. You know, for example, if you work with somebody who is a visiting faculty or a postdoc in your BA, but they were your principal supervisor for your dissertation. So I don't think there is somebody who can better comment on your abilities, your research experiences, stuff like that. So I don't think it's the hierarchy that matters. I think it's how much do they know about you, stuff like that.
So just to quickly follow up on that, I think so the hierarchy in my experience doesn't matter when you're applying to the department. But if you're applying to external scholarships like Rhodes or Gates Cambridge or Commonwealth, in certain cases if you do get a recommendation from someone higher up, it does tend to help your application. But fundamentally, the focus needs to be on, who can write you a strong letter of recommendation. And if 3, assistant professors or adjunct professors can write you very solid recommendations, like always go for the stronger recommendation over the, vice chancellor's recommendation. But just that in certain places where you're only applying to scholarships, it does tend to be a small factor, but it's not like life or death.
Perfect. Thank you both. One final question for you. Are you aware of any scholarships for athletes or sports persons in the UK or the US? No worries if not. At the moment, we are not too sure if there are any such scholarships, I'm afraid. But yeah, if we ever come across such scholarship opportunities, we will definitely let you know. If it is at all helpful, for the roads there, I think one of the criteria that they mentioned towards the end is, about extracurriculars more generally, in addition to academic merit and the like. So yeah, so you may have a chance there if you are a sports person who's also got good academic qualifications to back them up. Okay, I think we've gotten through most of the questions there. So it falls upon me to thank the 5 of you for patiently staying on and getting through that super comprehensive presentation and taking all the questions that came your way. Thank you so, so much. And I'm sure you will be mentoring some of them on this call in due course. So I hope everyone is eagerly looking forward to the mentorship program itself beginning. Having said that, those of you who have not submitted your declaration yet, it's time. Please do it now. I'm going to shut the form in the next 15 minutes. So I've just popped the link again in the chat. So please open and submit that declaration immediately. For those who are asking if the recording will be shared with you, yes, we will upload the recording on Project EduAccess's YouTube channel. We can't summarize the whole session for you now, Alina, but we will upload a recording of the session on our YouTube channel, hopefully in 24 hours, if not at least by Monday. So please just go to our YouTube channel. I've again linked it here and check on Monday for the recording. I would also recommend just subscribing to the YouTube channel so you get notifications every time we put up a recording there, because beyond the Pakistan Graduate Mentorship Programme, Project EduAccess is also running a similar mentorship program in India, which is also broader in scope in that we are covering applications in US, European universities as well as I think some universities in the Asia Pacific. So you're more than welcome to attend public workshops advertised on Project EduAccess's Instagram page, which once again I've linked here in the chat. Please just follow us, and whatever public workshops we organize, all of you are more than welcome to attend. And whatever questions you have, please feel free to ask. Okay, I think that's a good place for us to end this workshop. Thank you again, Musa, Ali, Hassan. I'm not sure if Nimra and Baji are still on the call, but thank you all again for organizing this workshop, and see you all soon. Just a reminder that we are running a workshop again at 6 p.m. Pakistan time tomorrow. And this one is going to be on navigating standardized tests. So all your questions about GRE, GMAT, I know that I didn't read them out for Hassan to answer, but you can bring those questions to tomorrow's workshop and get your answers. And even any questions that you have about the English language test requirement will be addressed at tomorrow's workshop. So please ensure that you attend it. Perfect. Thank you. See you all.